Welcome to Master Research Project. My name is Norman. I'll be your lecturer today and next week. During these two lectures, I'm going to cover the following four topics: introducing quantitative research method, sampling method, survey design, and data analysis. A little information about myself. My name is Norman. I'm a professor in marketing at Glasgow Caledonian University. This is my email address. If you have any question relating to research method or quantitative research method, you're more than welcome to send me an email. Well, I got my PhD in management from Royal Holloway, University of London. I did my master at the University of Birmingham, and I got my bachelor degree from the University of Pittsburgh. Well, these three universities, first of all, they're pretty good universities, and they taught me a lot about quantitative research method. However, this is something I'm going to say to you probably more than once, is that research method, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, a lot about these materials, a lot of these skills, you have to learn it on your own. You have to do research on your own. It cannot be 100% taught in a classroom scenario. So this is something that I want to say before I start my lecture today. But still, these lectures, they are still necessary, and they're still useful to your learning and for you to become a better researcher. First of all, it will improve your overall research skill. You will learn a number of data analytical methods. It helps you to make better decisions as an academic researcher, but also as a manager. Second, you will be able to apply some of these tools by using some of the very established softwares, for example, SPSS. I'm going to talk more about the software a little bit later. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, this lecture will help you to understand and interpret the finding that you gain from data analysis, because data is not the same as information. Unless you can interpret and distribute this data, they are pretty much useless. So before we begin, let's just look at the definition of marketing research from AMA's website. According to AMA, American Marketing Association, marketing research is the function that links customers, and public to the marketers through information. This is used to inform, identify, and define marketing opportunities and problems. So in order to have this sort of information, we need to carry out research. And some of these can be done in qualitative research methods, or some of them will require that you do a quantitative research. Well, there are different stages for managers when trying to make a decision. For example, try to analyze a situation, try to develop a strategy, or develop a specific program, or finally to implement and control a particular campaign. Marketing research can be helpful in all these stages. Of course, their roles will be slightly different. Their functions, strengths and weaknesses will be slightly different. However, in general, qualitative research method, quantitative research method, or even secondary research can be useful to inform managers and help managers to make the best possible decision. So SPSS, well, this is the software that I'm going to use for these 2 weeks. It is a very established software. It has been around for 30-40 years or even more. Therefore, first of all, it is available on GCU app anywhere, so you can access this application even from your home computer. And second, the good thing is that because it is such an established program, there are a lot of free resources on how to use it, from the very beginning, how to install the software, to how to run some of the most sophisticated analysis. So if you type this keyword, a handbook of statistical analysis using SPSS, or IBM SPSS Statistic 21 Brief Guide, you have a lot of free resources. They're a little bit old, but this software has been around for so long. Therefore, most of the tools, most of the materials, they're still roughly the same. So use this resource to help you to become a better researcher. Before starting to talk about quantitative research, I think it is useful to look at what is qualitative research, just to refresh your memory. Qualitative research method produce information only. I'm pretty sure you have learned this in the previous lectures. Helps you to understand, be informative about particular case studied, or any general conclusions. It might help you to propose certain propositions or hypotheses. However, it cannot test or verify this hypothesis or propositions. You have to use quantitative methods to accomplish this particular aim. And also, qualitative research method is not that useful if you're trying to generalize your results to a larger population, because usually you're studying a small group of participants, 30, 50s, usually around this number. But quantitative research, you're looking at several hundreds or even several thousands of participants. Well, quantitative methods is basically the systematical empirical investigation of a business or social phenomenon through the use of statistics, through the use of mathematical equations. You play around with numerical data, and you often require a computer or softwares to help you to analyze your data. I mean, of course, you can do it by hand, but it's going to take you a lot of time. Sometimes, a student will consider doing both methods or mixed method, because qualitative research method help you to understand the meaning, help you to understand the conclusion produced by quantitative methods. On the other hand, quantitative method give you precise and testable expression of qualitative ideas. Despite that said, personally, I think at this level, PG or even undergraduate level, I think using both method or mixed method is not a good idea, because you're still learning about research method, and it's difficult enough to master one method, let alone two methods. Therefore, I strongly encourage you to discuss this with your supervisor if you're thinking about using a mixed method approach. So what is quantitative research? Well, but quantitative, in order to qualify as quantitative research, you have to you're trying to explain a phenomenon by collecting and analyzing numerical data. That's quite important. And then also, you have to recognize, quantitative data will be able to tell you whether there's a difference, whether the results are significant or not significant, but it cannot explain, or at least in most cases, it cannot explain why it is different, or why it is supported, or why the result is not supported. And data collected are always numerical, or if you're doing quantitative research, and then you're analyzing it using statistical methods. For example, a regression, for example, ANOVA. And usually, the variables in quantitative research are controlled. We are trying to make sure that it feels almost like a laboratory science. So we want to eliminate interference and then measure any change because of this between human behavior or between consumer behavior. This is quite different from qualitative research, because qualitative research, we often want the participant to be in the real world. Also, it is very important that when you conduct quantitative research, you want to make sure that the results and the participant are somewhat randomized. This is to reduce your subjective bias. For those of you who have done qualitative research before, you probably noticed that bias is acceptable to an extent in qualitative research, but for quantitative research, we're trying to eliminate it as much as possible. And some students and some research, you will be using a combination of quantitative and qualitative research method in one research or one research project. This is what we refer to as a mixed method research or mixed method approach. So this is just for your information. So introducing, before you start doing quantitative research, you have to think about whether your research idea fits into these three categories. First of all, there's a temporal presence. X needs to happen before Y. For example, I hit the table, therefore my hand hurts. So in other words, hitting the table is the first thing. It happens before my hands got hurt. Second, there's a covariation of cause and effect. If X, then Y. If not X, then not Y. It means that, well, if I hit the table, my hand will hurt. If I don't hit the table, my hand will not hurt. And then third, you want to make sure that there's no possible alternative explanation. For example, my hand hurt is not because, well, I had pre-existing conditions, or I cut my hand earlier this morning when trying to make breakfast. So you want to make sure that there's no possible explanation. Well, there are a few exceptions to these rules, but as a general guidance, before you start thinking about doing quantitative research, you want to make sure that your research idea somewhat fits into these three categories. But also, sometimes you want to make sure that your research idea make common sense. For example, high temperature at your vacation leads to being eaten by lion. Well, this is likely to be a true statement. But on the other hand, you know that, well, there's no direct correlation between temperature and the chance of being eaten by lion. It is probably because you go to hot places that has lions, right? So you want to make sure that even though sometimes an idea that probably fits all the bills, but it doesn't make common sense. It doesn't fit common sense. So you want to think about it from that perspective as well before you start to do your quantitative research. A quantitative research or quantitative research project, in the first 3 chapters, you need to cover these 3 things: your research context, your theory, and your method. But also, very importantly, and very different from qualitative research, is that in quantitative research, you always have a framework, a research framework. In qualitative research, sometimes you do, but it is not 100% needed. It's not 100% essential. But in quantitative research, it's almost always needed. You always need to have a research framework. So let me give you an explanation of these 4 elements. For example, one of my research projects is about bringing your dogs along when you go on to tourism activities, or when you go, for example, you visit Spain. So your research context is about bringing your dogs when going to tourism activities. So you want, in this chapter or in this section, you want to talk about how many people in the UK owns dog or has a dog in the household, and then you want to explain a little bit about British tourists' behavior. Or whatever, if it is not British, then in other countries. So that's your research context. This way, you develop a framework. So to explain a person's behavior, well, you need to look at his or her intention. And then based on the theory of planned behavior, a person's intention is determined by his or her attitude, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. For example, well, the reason that you're listening to this lecture is probably this morning or this afternoon or whatever time it is that you had intention to listen to this lecture. And the reason that you had the intention to listen to this lecture is probably because, well, you have a positive attitude about listening to this lecture. For example, you feel, well, it is important for you to participate in class activities. But it is also because, well, maybe about subjective norms. Because of the people you value, for example, your parents, your spouse, your friends, they believe it is important that you listen to lecture, you participate in lecture activities. Thirdly, it is also because this activity is not very difficult to do. For example, logging into your university account or go on to YouTube and listening to this video is not that difficult. So in other words, as you can see, if this is the theory of planned behavior, this is a research framework that helps you to explain a person's activity or a person's behavior. Based on this framework, then you can develop your hypothesis. So I'm not going to go over them one by one because I'm just going to focus on the first one to give you an example. H1. Owners' attitude toward taking their dogs when participating in tourism activity have a positive influence on their intention. So that's the first one over here. Attitude, influence, intention. That's how you develop your hypothesis, and it is because it is based on your research framework. And based on your research framework, based on your hypothesis, then you can develop your questionnaire. Your questionnaire cannot be something that you just randomly think of. It cannot be something that you just think, well, I'm going to ask this question to this person. I'm going to ask that question for that person. You cannot do that. It has to be standardized. It has a very strict rules. We can go into detail a little bit later if you decided that you want to do a quantitative research method. Otherwise, I think this kind of a brief introduction will be sufficient for now. Well, for those of you, whether you're doing qualitative research or quantitative research, you need theory. This is the part that a lot of students have trouble or at least at some stage struggle with. So based on my years of experience, I think these are some of the commonly used theories that can be applied to consumer behavior, marketing research, tourism study, leisure studies, event and sports research. Theory of planned behavior has been around many years, like I said. Theory of leisure constraints. If you're trying to study why people do not go to a certain destination, why people do not go to certain events, this is very useful. Motivation theory can pretty much be applied to anything that related to consumer research, or when you're trying to study why a person do what he or what she does. Meaning attribution theory, that's quite useful if you're studying online behavior. Social identity theory, if you study branding, you study group behavior, that's also important, that this is useful. Social exchange theory helps you to understand human behavior and human interactions. For example, the interaction between salesperson and consumer. Finally, goal orientation theory helps you to understand a person's learning behavior. For example, why the person learned to use certain technology, or why a salesperson learned to study new skills. So these are just some of the theories that I think is quite commonly used, but there are many others. If you have any questions, speak to your supervisors or email me, and then we can see whether there are more suitable theories for your studies. So with the basis covered, in the next video, I'm going to go into some of the details about how to carry out, how to set up and design a quantitative research project. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you very soon.